Have you ever seen a moment so simple, yet so powerful that it changed the way someone looked at the entire world? That question might sound strange, but for Adhering Volkov, a 62-year-old billionaire from Moscow, it would define the turning point of his life. He had everything that could be bought: private jets, oil companies, estates in Monaco and Geneva. But what he did not have, at least in those days, was a reason to soften the hard layers that had built up around his heart. On a brisk autumn morning, Adhering boarded his Gulfstream G700 jet with his staff. It wasn't just a normal flight, it was supposed to be a rare family trip. His daughter, Irina, a widow of 2 years, clutched her 2-year-old son Mikhail to her chest. The little boy was restless, rubbing his small fists against his sleepy eyes. Adhering did not like bobbies, he never hid that fact. In his opinion, children were loud, messy, and distracting, everything he despised. Yet, out of duty to his only daughter, he agreed to fly with her and his grandson from Paris to New York, where Irina planned to start a new chapter of her life. But that morning, something unusual happened at the private terminal. A thin, dark-skinned boy of about 12 stood at the corner of the lounge, clutching a worn school bag. His name was Kwame Mensah, and he was not supposed to be there. Kwame's mother was one of the flight attendants hired temporarily for this trip, a last-minute replacement. She could not find anyone to watch her son, so with the captain's reluctant permission, she brought him along. He was quiet, polite, and promised to stay seated for the entire flight. Adhering spotted him immediately and scowled. "Why is there a child here?" he barked in Russian-accented English. His assistant stammered out an explanation, but Adhering waved his hand dismissively. "Fine, but he stays out of sight. I do not pay billions for distractions." Kwame lowered his eyes and nodded, clutching his school bag tighter. He had learned long ago not to answer back to men like this. The jet ascended smoothly into the clouds. Adhering reclined in his leather seat, sipping a crystal glass of vodka, flipping through financial reports. Irina, however, struggled. Little Mikhail wouldn't stop crying, his small body wriggled, his wails echoing against the cabin walls. "Papa, I can't calm him," Irina whispered desperately. "Then hire a nanny," Adhering snapped. "You knew children cry, why must the entire plane suffer?" Irina's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She rocked her son, sang softly, but nothing worked. The billionaire rolled his eyes and buried himself in his documents, pretending not to notice. And then it happened. A soft voice whispered, "Shushhh." Everyone turned. Kwame had risen slowly from his corner seat. His small hands were nervous, but his eyes were gentle as they met Irina's. "May I try?" he asked timidly. Adhering's eyebrows shot up in outrage. "You, a boy, sit down immediately." But before he could explode further, Irina, desperate for relief, nodded at Kwame. She carefully handed over her squirming baby. The moment Kwame held Mikhail, something magical occurred. The child's cries softened into whimpers. Kwame shifted him against his shoulder, patting his tiny back with a natural rhythm. Then he rocked gently, humming an old lullaby his grandmother used to sing back in Accra, Ghana. "Shush, little one," he whispered again, "sleep will find you." Within minutes, the billionaire's grandson had melted into peaceful sleep, his tiny head resting securely against Kwame's shoulder. The cabin fell silent. Irina covered her mouth, shocked and relieved. The crew exchanged amazed glances. Even the pilots peeked through the cockpit door, stunned by the transformation. But the greatest shock belonged to Adhering Volkov. He froze, staring at the sight of his crying heir, his grandson, completely soothed not by wealth, not by technology, not by an army of professionals, but by a poor black boy in ragged clothes. For the first time in decades, the billionaire's mouth hung open, words failing him. Adhering leaned back slowly, studying the boy. There was nothing remarkable about Kwame at first glance. Skinny, with frayed cuffs on his shirt, shoes that had seen too many streets, and eyes too serious for his age. Yet there was something in his touch, in the way he rocked Mikhail, that radiated a quiet strength. Kwame didn't look up. He focused only on the baby, humming softly until Mikhail was fully asleep. He then adjusted his position carefully so the little one could breathe comfortably, his movements instinctive, practiced. "Where did you learn this?" Irina whispered in awe. Kwame smiled faintly. "My baby sister Amma, she was always sick. I used to carry her this way so Mama could rest after long shifts." Something in his tone made Irina's throat tighten. Adric, however, felt something different, an unease he could not explain. He wanted to dismiss it, to tell the boy to sit down, but he couldn't. For reasons beyond logic, he couldn't tear his eyes away. The rest of the flight took on a surreal atmosphere. Quaim sat quietly with Mikkel asleep on his shoulder as though he had been born for that role. The boy never complained, never fidgeted, just kept the baby safe and content. Irina dozed for the first time in hours, exhaustion washing over her. The billionaire sat rigid, sipping his drink without tasting it, his gaze flicking constantly to the boy. His mind churned with questions he had never asked before. How could someone with nothing give so much comfort? How could a stranger carry his legacy, the grandson he once saw as merely another heir to mold, so tenderly? When they finally landed at JFK, Irina awoke refreshed and thankful. She reached for her son, who stirred but did not cry. "Thank you," she whispered to Quaim, her voice trembling with genuine gratitude. Quaim only smiled shyly and nodded. Adric stepped off the jet with his usual cold air of command, but inside something had cracked. For the first time in years he was shaken, not by a business deal gone wrong, not by a rival's betrayal, but by a poor boy's touch. He didn't say a word to Quaim as they descended the stairs, but the image was burned into his mind, his grandson's small head resting peacefully against that boy's shoulder. The billionaire who once thought he had seen everything in life had just witnessed something he could not buy, something priceless. That night in his Manhattan penthouse, Adric poured himself another drink but found no comfort in it. The silence of the vast rooms pressed down on him. He could still hear that soft whisper. Shushhh. It haunted him. Who was that boy? Why did his presence feel like a mirror held up to everything Adric lacked? For the first time in decades, the billionaire could not sleep. And he had no idea that this was only the beginning, that the boy named Quaim Mensa was about to turn his world upside down. Adric Volkov had built his empire on numbers, contracts, and ruthless decisions. Feelings were for the weak, that had always been his creed. But after that flight, his thoughts betrayed him. He would sit in meetings with board members and suddenly recall the quiet hum of a lullaby. He would scroll through billion-dollar reports yet see only the picture of his grandson's head pressed against a poor boy's shoulder. It disturbed him. Worse, it unsettled his pride. How could a child, an ordinary boy with nothing, leave such a mark on him, a man who had dined with presidents and dictated the rise and fall of economies? 3 days after landing in New York, Adric tried to dismiss it all. His daughter Irina and little Mikkel stayed with him in the penthouse for a while. At dinner, Mikkel grew fussy again, banging his spoon on the table. Irina sighed, ready to calm him, when suddenly her son blurted out one word that made her freeze. Quaim. Adric's fork slipped from his fingers. Irina's mouth fell open. What did you say, my darling? Quaim, Mikkel repeated, clapping his little hands and giggling as though remembering a dear friend. The boy's name rolled through the billionaire's marble dining hall like an accusation. Adric's face hardened, but inside something twisted. His grandson, his heir, had uttered his first real name, not Papa, not Mama, not even Grandpa. It was Quaim. That night, Adric stormed into his study, packing furiously. Absurd, he muttered under his breath. A child clings to what is familiar, that is all. He'll forget this boy in time. But even as he spoke, he didn't believe his own words. For the first time in years, Adric did something he despised. He called one of his assistants not for business, but for information. Find the boy, he ordered. The one from the flight. I want his full name, his mother's details, everything. The next morning, a dossier lay on his desk. He opened it with the caution of a man afraid of what he might discover. Name Quaim Mensa. Age 12. Birthplace Accra, Ghana. Mother Abina Mensa, temporary flight attendant, widow, struggling immigrant in Paris. Background: father died in a construction accident when Quaim was 6. Mother works 3 jobs, lives in a cramped apartment outside Paris. Adric's chest tightened unexpectedly. He stared at the passport-sized photo clipped to the file. The boy's gaze was calm, serious, yet behind his eyes was a weight that no 12-year-old should carry. Adric snapped the folder shut. Ridiculous, he growled, though his voice trembled. What is this to me? The answer came that very evening. Irina tried again to put Mikkel to sleep. The baby screamed louder than ever. Exhausted, she sat on the floor of the nursery, tears spilling down her cheeks. Adhering, standing awkwardly at the doorway, watched helplessly. "Papa," she whispered, "I can't do it alone, I need help." Her words cut him deeper than any business betrayal. For the first time, Adhering realized how fragile his daughter was, how lonely she had become since her husband's death, and how useless he was in matters of the heart. Then, in the middle of that chaos, Mikkel wailed again, only this time his cry was followed by one desperate word. "Quaim!" The sound broke something inside Adhering. He turned away abruptly, hiding his face. But deep down he knew, his grandson didn't need more toys, more wealth, or more sterile nannies. He needed comfort. He needed that boy. The following week, Adhering arranged a private flight back to Paris. His official reason, business. But his true motive gnawed at him like a secret he couldn't admit, even to himself. In Paris, his limousine rolled through gray, rain-soaked streets until it stopped at a crumbling apartment block. The billionaire had not stepped into such a place in 40 years. The stench of fried oil and damp concrete hit him as he climbed the narrow stairs, his bodyguards flanking him. A thin woman opened the door. She was dressed neatly, but her tired eyes revealed endless struggles. "Madame Abina Mensa?" Adhering asked stiffly. "Yes," she replied cautiously. "I am Adhering Volkov, your son. He was on my flight." Her expression hardened immediately. She pulled the door closer as if shielding her home. "If Quaim did something wrong, sir, forgive him. He is a good boy, please." Adhering raised a hand. "No, he did not do wrong. He did something unexpected." At that moment, Quaim appeared from behind his mother, clutching a small notebook. His eyes widened when he saw the billionaire. "Sir," he whispered almost in awe. For a long moment, Adhering only stared at him. Memories of that quiet whisper, "Shush," echoed in his mind. Without realizing it, the billionaire's lips parted. "My grandson remembers you." Abina's eyes softened slightly. She invited them inside, though her pride fought against it. The apartment was small, barely 2 rooms. A single light bulb flickered in the ceiling. Quaim quickly cleared schoolbooks from a chair so Adhering could sit, though the billionaire looked awkward in such modest surroundings. "Why are you here?" Abina asked finally, suspicion lacing her voice. Adhering hesitated. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, yet now words failed him. "My daughter," he swallowed. "She struggles with her child, and the boy my grandson calls only for Quaim." The room fell silent. Abina's eyes narrowed. "So, you want my son to play servant to your family, to rock your rich baby while we stay in poverty?" Her words were sharp, and for once Adhering had no defense. He sat exposed as though stripped of all his power. Quaim, however, spoke gently. "Mama, I want to help. The baby was kind to me. He smiled when he woke up on the plane. He is my friend." Abina looked at her son, torn between protecting him and respecting his heart. Finally she sighed. "Quaim is only 12, but if he chooses, I cannot stop him. Still, Mr. Volkov, understand this, we are not for sale." The words hit Adhering like thunder. He realized then that not everyone bowed to wealth, not everyone could be bought. And strangely, he respected her for it. That evening, as he left the apartment, Adhering paused in the doorway. He looked back at the boy who had shaken his soul. "Quaim Mensa," he said solemnly, "our paths are not finished. Whether you realize it or not, you have already stepped into my world." Quaim tilted his head, not fully understanding, but his steady gaze held no fear. As Adhering's limousine drove away through the rain, his mind churned with questions. Why was fate binding him to this boy? Why did his heart, long frozen in pride, beat differently whenever he remembered that simple whisper? "Shushhh." That night, Adhering sat alone in his Paris hotel suite. For the first time in his life, he admitted the truth aloud. "A poor boy did what I could not, and I need him." He did not yet know how dangerous, how costly, and how transformative that need would become. But destiny had already begun to weave their stories together, threads of wealth and poverty, power and humility, bound by the quiet lull of a child's cry. And nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The next morning, Adhering Volkov found himself packing the length of his Parisian hotel suite like a restless animal. He had conquered oil markets, steel industries, and international banks, yet one poor boy had disarmed him completely. The billionaire's thoughts returned again and again to Quame's calm face, his steady hands, the way his grandson had melted in his arms as if he had known him forever. It unsettled him. It infuriated him. And yet beneath all that, it humbled him. For the first time in years, Adhering wasn't thinking about mergers or stocks. He was thinking about a boy who had nothing and yet carried something priceless inside him. That afternoon, Irina joined him at the suite. She looked worn out, her eyes ringed with sleeplessness, Mikkel fussy and restless in her arms. "Papa," she said quietly, "I cannot keep doing this alone. Mikkel refuses every nanny I've tried. He wakes in the night screaming, I don't know what to do anymore." Adherin's jaw tightened. He hated seeing weakness in his bloodline, yet this was no weakness, it was exhaustion. His daughter's pain pierced him like a knife. And then Mikkel, in his half-formed baby words, murmured again. "Quame." The sound silenced the room. Irina looked at her father with pleading eyes. "You saw it, Papa, you saw how he calmed him. Why can't we ask the boy again, just until Mikkel adjusts?" Adhering clenched his fists. A Volkov did not beg, a Volkov did not depend on outsiders, and yet he could not deny the truth staring him in the face. 2 hours later, Adherin's black limousine rolled once more into the crumbling Parisian neighborhood. Abina answered the door with her usual guarded expression. Quame peeked from behind her, his notebook still in his hand. "You again," Abina said sharply, folding her arms. "What now, Mr. Volkov?" Adhering cleared his throat, his voice unusually stiff. "I require your son's assistance, temporarily." Abina's eyes narrowed. "Assistance? My son is 12, not a servant." Irina stepped forward gently, her face earnest. "Madame Mensa, please, it is not about service. My son, he will not sleep, he will not rest. Only when Quame held him did peace come. I am begging you, mother to mother." The raw honesty in Irina's tone softened Abina's suspicion. She glanced at her boy. Quame's eyes shone with quiet hope. "Mama," he said softly, "I want to help just for a little while." Abina sighed deeply, her shoulders sinking. She turned back to Adhering, her voice firm. "If my son helps you, it will be under my rules, no exploitation, no disrespect, and he will continue his studies. Do you understand?" Adhering, a man used to dictating terms, found himself nodding like a chastised schoolboy. Understood. That evening, for the first time in weeks, Mikkel slept soundly. Quame sat in the penthouse nursery, rocking the toddler against his shoulder, humming that same old Ghanaian lullaby. The boy's voice was soft but sure, each note wrapping around the child like a protective blanket. Irina stood nearby, tears streaming silently down her face, not of sadness but relief. Adhering watched from the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, yet inside his heart beat strangely fast. The scene before him gnawed at everything he had believed. He had always thought power came from money, from control. But here was a penniless boy, armed with nothing but patience and love, doing what millions in wealth could not. It shook him to the core. Days turned into a week. Quame stayed with them in the hotel, helping with Mikkel during the day, returning to his mother's apartment in the evenings. The bond between the boy and the baby grew unbreakable. Mikkel would giggle at the mere sight of him, his tiny hands reaching out eagerly. Irina grew lighter, laughing more freely, her exhaustion fading. Even the staff whispered in awe at the boy who had transformed the household. But the most remarkable change was in Adhering himself. One morning, Irina found her father seated awkwardly in the nursery. Quame was guiding Adhering Volkov on how to hold the baby properly. "No, sir," Quame said gently, "not too stiff. Bobbies feel it when you are tense. Loosen your arm like this." Adhering grunted, his face red with concentration as he adjusted. For a moment, Mikkel squirmed, but then, miraculously, he settled, resting calmly in his grandfather's arms. Irina gasped. Adhering froze, staring down at the child who, for the first time, had not cried at his touch. His throat tightened, something unfamiliar stung his eyes. He blinked it away quickly, gruffly handing the baby back to Quame. "Enough," he muttered, rising abruptly, but everyone in the room had seen it, the unmovable titan had cracked. That night Adric sat alone on the balcony of the suite overlooking the glittering lights of Paris. A glass of untouched vodka sat beside him. He thought of his youth growing up in Moscow's icy streets, clawing his way out of poverty through ruthless ambition. He had promised himself never to be weak, never to need anyone, and in doing so he had built walls so high that even his daughter had lived in their shadow. But now a boy with nothing had scaled those walls effortlessly. Adric clenched his fists against the railing. "What is happening to me?" he whispered into the night. The memory of that lullaby drifted through his mind again, soft, gentle, human. For the first time in decades, Adric Volkov felt truly small. The following morning he surprised even himself. He called Abina to the suite. The woman arrived cautious, defensive as always. Adric stood before her, hands clasped behind his back, struggling to find words. "Your son," he began haltingly, "he is remarkable." Abina tilted her head, suspicious of flattery. "He is simply my boy." Adric nodded slowly. "No, he is more. He has something the world does not teach, something money cannot buy, and I owe him." The admission nearly choked him, but he forced it out. Abina studied him for a long moment, then softened slightly. "Perhaps you owe him nothing, Mr. Volkov. Perhaps he is simply showing you what you have forgotten." The words pierced him deeper than he expected. Forgotten, yes, perhaps he had. But destiny was not finished weaving its threads. That very night, a phone call shattered the fragile peace. One of Adric's rivals in Moscow had launched an attack on his empire, a hostile takeover exploiting his absence. Billions were at stake. Adric's empire was burning and he was thousands of miles away, babysitting feelings he had long denied. As he slammed the phone down, fury surged through him. He could not afford distraction. He could not afford weakness. Yet even as anger roared inside him, a soft sound drifted from the nursery, Quame's voice, humming that lullaby once again. Adric closed his eyes, torn between two worlds, the ruthless empire he had built and the fragile seed of something new blooming in his heart. Which would he choose? And more importantly, what would fate choose for him? The call from Moscow reverberated in Adric's skull long after the line went dead. Hostile bids, collapsing stocks, betrayal. Words that once sharpened his instincts now echoed like the tolling of a bell. For decades, crises had fueled him. He had thrived in storms, but this time was different. Because in the nursery down the hall, a poor boy from Ghana was rocking his grandson to sleep with nothing but a whisper. And somehow, that mattered more than billions. The next morning, Adric's assistant Yuri arrived in Paris with stacks of files and reports. He was a wiry man, sharp-eyed and perpetually nervous in Adric's presence. "Sir, if we don't return to Moscow immediately, Volkov Industries will collapse. Your rivals smell blood. We cannot delay." Adric's jaw flexed. He looked at Irina, pale from sleeplessness, then at the closed nursery door where he could faintly hear Quame's humming. For the first time, Adric hesitated. "I will handle it from here," he said finally. "Sir." "I said from here." Yuri swallowed hard. He knew better than to argue, but the fear in his eyes said everything. Volkov's empire was on fire and its master was staring at a child instead of the battlefield. Later that afternoon, Adric entered the nursery. Quame sat cross-legged on the carpet, a toy plane in one hand, while Mikkel laughed and clapped his tiny hands. The sound was pure, untainted joy. Adric stood silently in the doorway, watching. For the first time in years, he realized he could not remember the last time he had laughed like that. "Quame," he said gruffly. The boy looked up, his expression calm. "Would you walk with me?" They strolled through the hotel garden, the autumn air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves. Adric, a man who commanded nations with his wealth, found himself strangely tongue-tied. Finally he cleared his throat. "You calmed my grandson, you calmed my daughter, and you boy, you even made me hold him without fear." Quame tilted his head. "But isn't that what family does?" The words struck Adric like a blade. Family. He had built palaces, yet his own house had been hollow. Adric stared at the boy. "Quame, how do you know these things? You're only 12. Quame looked away, his eyes distant. "When my father died, Mama cried every night. My baby sister Amma was sick. I had to be strong, I had to learn." Adric's throat tightened. A memory of his own childhood clawed its way back. His father, a drunk laborer, fists heavy, voice cruel. Adric had sworn never to be weak, never to need anyone. Yet here stood a boy who had carried burdens heavier than his years, and somehow emerged with kindness instead of bitterness. That evening, Irina entered the study, her face worried. "Papa, your empire, will it fall?" Adric sat in silence, staring out at the Paris skyline. For the first time in his life he answered honestly, "Perhaps." Irina gasped, "And you're not going back?" Adric turned to her slowly. "Dusha moya, all my life I chased power, but it gave me nothing but enemies. This boy, Quaim, he showed me something I did not know I had lost." "What?" she whispered. "A heart." Irina's breath caught. For a moment, father and daughter looked at one another, not as billionaire and heiress but simply as blood bound by pain. But peace does not last long in the world of men like Adric Volkov. 2 nights later, as the family returned to the hotel from dinner, danger arrived. A black van screeched to a halt outside. Masked men spilled out, weapons in hand. Screams echoed in the street as civilians scattered. Yuri shouted, "Get down!" Bodyguards rushed forward, but the ambush was swift and brutal. One of the men lunged toward Irina, yanking at her arm. Mikhail screamed in terror. "Papa!" Irina shrieked. Without thinking, Quaim hurled himself between them. The boy's thin frame shielded her as he shouted, "Run!" A fist slammed into Quaim, knocking him to the ground. But his defiance gave the guards precious seconds to fire back, scattering the attackers. Adric roared like a wounded beast, surging forward with a strength no one thought a man of 62 could muster. He grabbed a fallen pistol from the pavement and fired 2 shots into the night sky, sending the retreating van screeching away. When the chaos cleared, Adric dropped to his knees beside Quaim. The boy's lip was split, his cheek bruised, but his eyes were fierce, unafraid. "You protected my family," Adric whispered hoarsely. "A boy of 12 protected a man worth billions." Quaim managed a small smile. "I told you, sir, that's what family does." Adric's vision blurred. He pulled the boy into his arms, clutching him as though letting go would mean losing something he had only just found. Later that night, as the police took statements and the bodyguards secured the hotel, Irina sat by Quaim's bedside. He winced as she dabbed ointment on his cuts. "You're braver than most men I know," she murmured. Quaim smiled faintly. "I wasn't brave, I was just afraid they'd take Mikhail." Irina kissed his forehead softly. "That's what makes you brave, Quaim, fear but still choosing to protect." At the doorway, Adric watched silently, his chest heavy with something he could barely name. For the first time in 62 years, Adric Volkov felt something unfamiliar, gratitude to someone who had no power, no wealth, no status. A poor boy, a boy who had risked his life for his family. And deep down, Adric knew, he could never let this child slip away again. The next morning, Adric made a decision that would shock not only his empire but the world itself. He summoned Abina to the suite. The woman's eyes widened when she saw her son's bruises. She glared at Adric. "This is what happens when the rich pull the poor into their wars," she spat, tears brimming. "My son could have been killed." Adric did not flinch. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of humility few had ever seen from him. "You are right, I failed him, but Madame Mensa," he paused, his voice trembling with sincerity. "Quaim is no longer just your son, he is my family too." Abina stiffened. "What do you mean?" Adric's voice grew firm. "I want to protect him, educate him, give him every opportunity in life, not because I pity him, but because he saved everything I love." The room went silent. Quaim looked from his mother to the billionaire, his young heart torn between loyalty to his roots and the strange new bond he had forged. Abina's eyes filled with tears. She cupped her son's face, whispering in Twi, "Quaim, wo I am Abusua no matter what. Quaim, you are my family always." Then she looked at Adric. "If you take him, you take me too. He is my son, I will not lose him." Adric nodded slowly. "Then so be it, you will both be under my protection." And just like that, a line was crossed, a line that would bind the worlds of wealth and poverty, Moscow and Accra, forever. That night, as Quaim once again rocked Mikhail to sleep, Adric sat beside him silently. The billionaire reached out, hesitated, then gently placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Shush," Quaim whispered, his lullaby steady. Adric's lips trembled. For the first time he whispered along, his voice rough but sincere. "Shush." And in that moment, something long buried inside him began to heal. But fate, ever cruel, was not finished testing them. For in Moscow, enemies sharpened their knives, and the war for Volkov's empire was only beginning. For 3 days, Paris became a fortress. Police cars circled the block, Adric's bodyguards doubled their watch, and every step outside was taken with caution. Yet inside, the sweet life carried on strangely tender. Mikhail laughed more than he had in months. Irina's cheeks glowed with peace, and Quaim, always calm, always steady, seemed to bring light to every room. But Adric Volkov could not ignore reality forever. His empire in Moscow was cracking under the weight of betrayal. Rivals circled like wolves, tearing pieces of Volkov Industries apart. The man who once devoured corporations now sat still, watching his grandson sleep. It terrified him, it freed him. And it forced him to ask, what kind of man did he want to be remembered as? One evening, Adric gathered his family in the sitting room. The firelight flickered across his weathered face. "I will return to Moscow," he announced. His voice carried the weight of steel. Irina's face paled. "Papa, it's too dangerous after what happened." He raised a hand. "It is not a choice, Dusha Moya. If I do not return, everything crumbles. My enemies will destroy the legacy your son should inherit." Her eyes glistened. "And what of us?" Adric turned slowly to Quaim. The boy sat quietly in the corner, Mikhail asleep against his chest. "You will come with me," Adric said firmly. Quaim's eyes widened. "Me to Moscow?" "Yes, you are part of this family now." His gaze softened, though his voice remained commanding. "Perhaps more than any of us, you hold the key to its survival." The flight to Moscow was tense. Unlike the first time when Quaim had sat in the shadows, this time he sat beside Irina and Mikhail as though he belonged. Adric sat opposite them, his face unreadable but his mind churned. He was taking a 12-year-old boy into the lion's den of Russian oligarchs. It was madness, it was dangerous, yet deep inside he knew fate had chosen this path. When they landed, Moscow greeted them with a storm. Sleek black cars awaited on the tarmac. Security bristled with weapons. The city skyline rose like jagged teeth against the night. "This," Adric muttered under his breath, "is not Paris." The Volkov estate loomed like a fortress of stone and glass. Gilded chandeliers lit the vast halls, portraits of stern ancestors glared down from the walls. To Quaim, it was another world. He had never seen such wealth, yet unlike others who would gape in awe, the boy's eyes remained steady, almost sad. "It is beautiful," he said quietly to Irina, "but very cold." She looked at him in surprise, then nodded slowly. "Yes, it is." Adric overheard. The words pricked his heart more than he cared to admit. The following morning the war began. Adric convened a boardroom meeting with his top executives, allies, and a few faces he no longer trusted. Quaim, at Adric's insistence, sat quietly at the end of the table, drawing in his notebook. The men scoffed. One whispered, "Has the old man gone senile?" bringing a street boy to the boardroom. But Adric ignored them. He slammed a dossier onto the table. "My enemies believe I am weak. They believe family has softened me. Let them think so." His eyes burned like fire. "But I am still Volkov, and I do not fall." The room erupted into debate, accusations, strategies. But as hours passed, fatigue dulled the billionaire's mind. He rubbed his temples, staring at endless charts and numbers that blurred together. And then an unexpected voice spoke. "Why don't you just change the game?" The room fell silent, heads turned. It was Quaim. He held up his notebook where he had sketched a simple drawing, a lion surrounded by jackals. The lion had stopped fighting. Instead, it had climbed higher where the jackals could not reach. Adric leaned forward, curiosity piqued. "Explain." Quaim's voice was shy but clear. "You're fighting them on their ground. They know how to cheat and steal, but if you change the rules, you win. Like in football, when the other team is too strong, you don't fight them where they are strongest. You play different." The room erupted in laughter. Executives smirked. One muttered, "We are listening to a child now." But Adric silenced them with a glare. His gaze never left Quaim. Different, you say, how? Quaim thought for a moment. Don't fight for what they want, leave them the scraps, build something new, something they can't touch. Adric's chest tightened. In those simple words he saw clarity that his advisors, with all their degrees and power, had not given him. He slammed his fist on the table. Enough, the boy is right, we will shift, not fight, we will create a new empire in clean energy while they claw at oil and steel, let them choke on the past. The executives stared in disbelief, but Adric's eyes gleamed with reborn fire. For the first time in weeks he felt alive. That evening Adric found Quaim in the nursery, building toy blocks with Mikkel. You saw what my men could not, Adric said quietly. Quaim shrugged. Sometimes grown-ups make things too big, but most problems are simple if you look from the outside. Adric studied him for a long moment. You are extraordinary, Quaim Mensa, you see truth where others see fog. The boy smiled faintly. I just see with my heart, sir. Those words cut deeper than any business deal. Adric realized that what made the boy powerful was not intelligence alone, it was love. And it was something Adric had spent his entire life running from. But even as the Volkovs found new strength, danger crept closer. One of Adric's rivals, Leonid Orlov, a ruthless oligarch known for his brutality, had grown furious at the billionaire's resilience. Volkov should be on his knees by now, Orlov spat to his men. Instead, he is rising again. Why, what changed? Reports whispered of a boy, a foreign boy, a poor black child who now lived in Volkov's house. Orlov sneered, then we will crush the boy, break him, and Volkov will break with him. Back at the estate, life seemed deceptively calm. Quaim continued to rock Mikkel to sleep each night, whispering softly. Shushhh. Adric often stood outside the door listening. Once he even mouthed the word silently, his lips trembling. But inside storms were gathering, enemies were circling. And the boy who had soothed a billionaire's heart was about to face the darkest test of his young life. Moscow slept under a heavy veil of snow, but inside the Volkov estate Adric could not rest. He stood by the window watching flakes descend like ash. His heart restless. It had been weeks since Quaim had first stepped into his life, and the boy's presence had shifted something deep in him. Yet shadows still clung to his empire, and one shadow in particular, Leonid Orlov, was closer than anyone realized. That night danger struck. It began with silence. The estate's alarms, usually sharp and loud, were cut. A dark van slipped through the rear gates, aided by betrayal within the staff. Inside, men in masks crept like wolves across the snow. Their orders were clear, take the boy. Quaim, meanwhile, was in the nursery rocking Mikkel to sleep. His soft whisper filled the room. Shushhh. The baby's eyes fluttered shut. The peace in that moment was shattered by the sound of shattering glass. Quaim spun around, 3 masked men stormed inside. Grab him, one barked. Quaim clutched Mikkel tight, his heart pounding. Fear froze him for a moment, but then something inside him, something born of hardship, of survival in the streets of Accra, snapped awake. No, he shouted. He darted behind the crib, shielding the baby with his small body. The intruders lunged, only to be met by Adric Volkov. The old billionaire entered like a storm, a pistol steady in his hand. His guards followed, guns drawn, but Adric himself pulled the trigger first. A shot rang out, striking the chandelier, raining sparks across the nursery. The intruders faltered, retreating just enough for Adric to grab Quaim by the arm. Run! The estate became chaos. Bullets thundered in the halls, guards clashed with mercenaries, shouts echoed through marble corridors. Adric, Quaim, Irina, and the baby fled through a hidden passage that wound beneath the house. Adric had built it decades ago for war, never thinking he'd use it to save his family. Quaim carried Mikkel, whispering shush through trembling lips. Irina clutched his free hand while Adric led the way with grim determination. When they emerged in the snowy woods behind the estate, 2 SUVs waited, engines roaring. Get in, Adric barked. But headlights flared from the tree line. Orlov's men had anticipated the escape. Trapped. From the enemy's convoy, Leonid Orlov himself stepped out. Tall, broad, with eyes like ice, he smiled coldly. Volkov, he sneered, you were untouchable once, but now hiding behind a child. Adrik's grip tightened on his pistol. "You made a mistake coming here yourself." Orlov's gaze slid to Quaim. "That boy does not belong in your world. Give him to me and perhaps I'll let you crawl back to what remains of your empire." Quaim's heart pounded. For a moment fear overwhelmed him, but then Mikkel whimpered against his shoulder and Quaim felt strength surge through him. He stepped forward, voice trembling but loud. "I am not afraid of you." The men around Orlov laughed, but Adrik did not. His chest swelled with pride and something deeper, something like love. "You hear him, Orlov," Adrik growled. "Even a child has more courage than you." Gunfire exploded. Guards from both sides clashed in a storm of chaos. Adrik fought like a man possessed, shielding his daughter and grandson with his body, but age slowed him and Orlov advanced, relentless. Quaim ducked behind a snow-covered boulder, clutching Mikkel close. He wanted to hide, but something in him refused. "If I do nothing, they will die." He spotted a flare gun dropped by one of Adrik's guards. Without thinking, he snatched it up, aimed at the sky and fired. The red flame shot upward, bursting in the night. The explosion startled Orlov's men, breaking their formation. It was enough. Adrik's reinforcements, loyal men who had been waiting for the signal, swept in from the forest. Orlov's forces crumbled under the sudden assault. Orlov, enraged, charged toward Quaim. His massive hand reached for the boy's throat. But before he could touch him, Adrik stepped between them. "Touch him and you face me." The two men clashed brutally, fist against fist, strength against rage. Snow stained red as they struggled. Finally, with a roar, Adrik struck Orlov down, pressing his pistol against the man's chest. "This is for my family," he hissed. One shot, silence. Orlov lay still. The threat was over. The aftermath was quiet. Snow fell gently over the battlefield, covering blood and broken steel. Adrik stood trembling, not from weakness but from the storm inside him. He turned to Quaim, who still held Mikkel, rocking him gently despite his own terror. The old billionaire fell to his knees before the boy. His voice broke, rough and raw. "You saved us again. You saved what I could not protect." Quaim's eyes filled with tears. "I was so scared." Adrik pulled him close, his arms encircling both boy and baby. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Malenki Lev. It is love stronger than fear, and you have more courage than any man I've ever known." Weeks later, Moscow knew peace again. With Orlov gone, Adrik moved swiftly, reshaping his empire. No longer just oil and steel, Volkov Industries pivoted toward the future: clean energy, technology, and global partnerships. But more important than business, Adrik rebuilt something he had long neglected: his family. At a private ceremony in the estate, Irina stood with tears in her eyes as Adrik placed a hand on Quaim's shoulder. "This boy," Adrik declared, "is no longer just a guest. He is Volkov. My grandson will grow with him as his brother, and when I am gone, it will be both of them who carry my name forward." Quaim's eyes widened. "But I'm not." "You are," Adrik interrupted firmly. "You are mine if you will have us." The boy's lips trembled. For the first time in his life, he whispered the word he had never dared to believe could be his. Family. Months later, they boarded a flight together: Adrik, Irina, Quaim, and little Mikkel. The plane soared above the clouds, but inside the cabin there was only peace. Mikkel fussed, restless in his mother's arms. Adrik moved to take him, but Quaim shook his head gently. "Let me." He cradled the baby against his shoulder, rocking slowly, whispering the word that had first tied all their fates together. Shushhh. Mikkel sighed, drifting into sleep. Adrik watched, his chest aching with emotion. The boy who had once been a stranger was now his greatest treasure. He leaned back in his seat, eyes glistening, and whispered into the quiet cabin. "Spasibo God for sending me this child." And as the plane cut across the sky, Adrik Volkov, once a lonely, broken billionaire, knew that his true empire was not built of steel or gold. It was built of love.